Hey there, everyone, and welcome to Pour and Explore, a wine, food, and travel podcast. I'm your host, Nick Elliott, the wine guy. I'd love to be your go-to guide for all things wine, food, and the amazing places they take us. Here on Pour and Explore, we'll sip, savor, and wander through the exciting world of wine, discuss incredible cuisines, and uncover the stories behind unforgettable destinations. Each week, I'll bring you lively conversations with wine experts, chefs, travel pros, and fellow enthusiasts. We'll share practical tips, hilarious tales, and plenty of inspiration to fuel your next adventure. So grab a glass, pull up a chair, and join me as we pour, explore, and celebrate the good life. Let's dive in. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Pour and Explore podcast. Thank you so much for being with me. I'm so excited to have today's guest on. Her name is Grace Simmons, and Grace is a travel mindset coach, and she is the founder of the Amethyst Palaver Hut LLC. She is also the amazing host of an awesome podcast you should absolutely check out called the Random and Wonderful Podcast. Go check that out on all of your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple. It's a wonderful podcast, and she has some great guests on. Grace, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. It's definitely my pleasure. So tell me a little bit, well, let's start with the podcast first. Tell me a little bit about the podcast.
So the Random and Wonderful is the best way I think that I can describe life. You have many opportunities to either try something new or explore something new or drag yourself through a pretty terrible situation. And I think if you're able to hang on and make it through, you end up leaving with a wonderful, or at least an interesting story. And that's kind of the platform of where the podcast came from. So it's my way of collecting travel stories. I share my own stories, I also interview guests and have them share theirs. And yeah, it's been really interesting.
Fantastic. For our listeners, what type of guests do you typically have on?
So guests that can share an impactful story. It doesn't need to be anything dramatic. You can tell me about how your luggage got lost. I think it's more important to hear how you coped with that versus, I don't know, something, overly extravagant. But there are some life-changing stories that have been on the podcast, but they're also just someone went on their first trip for the first time or the first solo trip for the first time. And it was like that moment of, I'm actually doing it. That was gold to me. So yeah, travelers or someone who's really new to traveling, if you just want to share your story. So the idea is share something that the listener can gain some knowledge from, right? That's pretty much those are my rules. That's about it. So as long as you have a good something to give advice, that's what we want.
All right, fantastic. So I've noticed from the podcast and, just conversations that we've had in the past, you concentrate a lot on solo travel, and I know you do a lot of solo travel. Can you tell us what's that pivotal moment that inspired you to start traveling solo?
Yeah, so it's sort of a two-part happening. The first part was a skydiving incident or a skydiving experience. There was no incident, but sounds terrifying. But I think just there was something about falling, like that moment where you're free falling before the parachute opens, and just being able to look over the earth and just at everything, how beautiful it is, and just feeling small, but not like insignificant, just a part of something much greater. Like, I don't know, that kind of like lit a fire in me. And going back to work, I was like, how are you guys so still? Like, there's so much to do. I had so much energy. And the second part of that which was that main turning point of my solo trip, was going to Iceland. So it was supposed to be a group trip. We're going to go hang out. I was going to meet up with my friend and her family. And just some things happened. They weren't able to go. And so I wanted to go to Iceland for years. And when this came up, I thought, okay, maybe I could wait, or I could just go. I know she'll forgive me. I could just go and make the most of it. So originally, because it was supposed to be a group trip, I then had to recreate the trip so that it was a solo trip. And that meant, figuring out my lodging, activities, and all that. which was a bit daunting, right? It was supposed to be a group activity. Now it's just me trying to figure this out.
Right.
But the really cool thing was I then got to plan a trip for Grace. And the experiences that I had, I learned that I was able to speak up for myself and actually figure out what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do, what food I wanted to eat versus like, waiting on the group to do the vote or just checking this out because there's a kid and we need to make sure the kid has some fun, like
Yep.
all of these different things. And so it was really cool that I had that experience and bringing that back. And this is why I focus on impact on the podcast, is because when I got back, I realized that all of these different skills that I had as a solo traveler, I could use at work. Like I needed to stand up for myself and reach out to other people. Maybe they know things that I don't, getting some shared information and all of these things that I think are just a part of trying to survive your first solo trip, end up being amazing interpersonal skills. So solo travel has been a great personal development tool.
All right, fantastic. I love that. Just thinking off the top of your head, were there any challenges that kind of came up in that first couple of solo trips that you took that might be beneficial to hear?
Yeah, I think one of the things to consider is, this is probably very simple, but understanding which side of the road people drive on, depending on where you're going. I think that's something to consider. One, which side of the road do they drive on? But also, is there a majority, like some places like the rental car will have a stick shift or instead of it being automatic. And if you're not used to that, you're going to end up paying a lot more, or there aren't going to be cars available for you.
Right.
And so just making sure you are planning out your entire logistics, right? So even when you get in country, you're really excited. You also need to figure out how to get from the hotel or from your airport to wherever it is that you're staying. And so just something simple like make sure you know what side of the road people drive on.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. It's not something that I would have thought of. I know how to drive a stick shift. So, I guess that's something that doesn't come up, for someone who does. But, if you don't, that's definitely a good thing to know. And it's so awesome that we've got a great resource like you that we can go to hear some of these challenges and see how you've overcome them and the advice that goes along with it.
Yeah.
In your experience, you talked about the building of confidence. Tell us a little bit more about that. Tell us about the confidence building that you've gotten from traveling solo.
Yeah. To summarize confidence, I think it's sort of a blend of experience and time. You can fake it till you make it kind of, but there is a need to repeat a certain action, right? So when you're traveling solo, if you're really nervous about asking for instructions, you can kind of do baby steps, right? So maybe use your phone, make sure it's charged and you have the right chargers. Use your phone to kind of map out where you're going. The next step would be learning a few phrases or words, especially if their main language is not English, if it is your first language, then you want to learn just a couple of words so that you can communicate. And then the next step is like trying to see what the locals do. So are you taking public transportation? Little things like that. And I think you're then expounding on what you thought you could do versus what you can. And what I like about the arena, I guess, of travel is you're not forced to do this because of whatever other pressures, right? You are the one who has control over your travel. You have control over how much you're able to give or explore or just restrain yourself. I think all of that goes into building that confidence. You are able to manage the person that you want to be, your growth. And it goes from either while you're traveling to who you are as a person when you get home. So some of those things, I think it's helpful just to journal and keep notes, but also practice what you've learned while you're traveling. So how can you use those same skills that you've built at home? How do you stand up for yourself and not in like an aggressive way? How do you just speak up a little bit more? How do you say, I really don't want to go to that event? Or, you know what, I really want to go check out that concert by myself. How do you take those little steps to then build your confidence?
Love that. Love that. Yeah, I mean, there are certainly a lot of, as human beings, we have an innate fear of the unknown, going
Mhm.
into new places, new experiences, and it can be daunting,
Yeah.
when you're alone. Maybe, talking about that and, moving past the fear, can you give us some practical tips for folks who might be, beyond the cars? Maybe talk a little bit more about the preparation before you even go to relax your fears a little bit more.
Yeah. So the first thing is your intention. I think it's really key to have an understanding of why you want to travel. And you could say, I just want to explore, I want to see this place, that's fine. But understand that if that is your intention, that intention is then going to guide what you do. So once you have decided what your intention is, for example, when I went to Portugal, it was for my birthday, I wanted to relax. That was it. Relaxing was my focus, right? So I designed my trip around that. The next thing is then your budget. So before you
Mm,
travel, before you get into all the exciting things that are happening, figure out how much you can actually spend on
mhm.
this trip. And I mean, from the day you like take off until you land, is your credit card going to surprise you, right? So it's helpful then. A really quick tip to manage your budget when you're traveling is before you leave, prepay for as many activities as you can. And so let's say you want to do an excursion, you would pay for that, horseback riding, all those different things, maybe even your restaurant, or that way you have a general idea of how much you're going to spend.
Yep.
That is so helpful because when you're in the midst of everything, right? You're in a new country, in a new place, it's really exciting. You want to spend a lot of money and you completely lose track of your budget. So setting those kind of helpful barriers for yourself by pre-purchasing is a really great tip. And then the next thing is figuring out, so based on your intention and your budget,
Mhm,
where you want to go. If your ideal trip is something like lavish and luxurious, but your budget does not align with that, but your
mhm,
intention does, I promise you, you can always find an alternate place to go. So, one of the last things that you want to do is being aware of your logistics. So, again, planning from getting from your home to your destination and back. And when you're already scheduling those different activities, that all plays into how you're going to get there. Do they have Uber? Is there certain like taxi service? My biggest advice is the planning. Now, I'm not
mhm,
a spreadsheet, like line by line kind of person, but
mhm.
I do like to make sure there's a really loose outline of what I need to do. And I purposely add rest days. So, the very last thing that I advise people to do is to listen to your body. For those of us who are over 30, sometimes the activities that we do when you're traveling are not your day to day, they're not within your day to day routine.
Mhm.
And so you want to make sure you're including a rest day, or at least give yourself just some time to reflect on your trip so you can actually enjoy the experience that you have paid for. What we want to avoid is for you to be that person who goes to work the next day and you're like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, I need a vacation, even though I just got back from my vacation, right? You don't want to hear that. And it just takes a day of rest. That's it. So I
Yeah.
think those are my really quick tips of just how to make the most out of your experience.
No, that's absolutely fantastic advice. I very rarely travel alone. My wife and I usually travel together or with our son. And what we find very helpful because, on trips, a lot of times unforeseen things happen.
Mhm.
Stuff happens. Luggage gets lost, or the hotel lost your reservation, or whatever the case may be. These things happen in travel. Just like they do in life. So I love having a backup plan,
Yeah.
in particularly a financial backup plan. I like to have a little bit of money tucked to the side that doesn't get touched, just in case of emergency. And
Yeah.
whether that's on a credit card or a bank account that you have access to, that's something that for my personal mental well-being, that's a thing that we like to do as well. Speaking of well-being, everything that you're talking about, doing the solo travel and getting out there and stepping outside of your comfort zone and things like that, these can be very, very cathartic, I would imagine, not only mentally, but for your physical well-being as well. Can you give us some ideas on how that's helped you beneficially?
Yeah. So because travel touches on all 8 dimensions of wellness, one of the things that I've noticed for myself is my emotional wellness. I think of myself as like a kind person, a really understanding person, but going through a job where I was completely burned out, as far as I was concerned, I was giving it my all and I was doing what I was supposed to do. Traveling allowed me to be separate, right, out of that daily routine and just take the time to reflect on who I was, how was I communicating my wants, and how am I able to achieve those wants? And all that ties into your emotional wellness. So you first have to understand who you are, what you want before you can communicate that. And when you communicate it, you need to do that in a way that is clear and also meaningful for the people that you're asking, to help you, or maybe that you're asking as far as establishing barriers. So I think one of the biggest ways that travel has impacted me is it has taught me how to dig into my emotional wellness, get in touch with who I am and why I react to certain things in a certain way. And then the growth part of that is changing my reaction to certain things. So if I'm more impatient, right? Traffic, nobody loves traffic. But just imagine, your flight's delayed. There's absolutely nothing you can do about it. You just need to sit there and just hang on. And so now I've noticed that over the past couple of years, if my flight's delayed, I will go find a cafe and I'll go sit down, I'll pull out a book, put my headphones in. And I've noticed that my resilience is just slowly building up because there are certain things that are within your control and there are certain things that aren't. And you have to know the difference, because if you try to fight a battle based on everything that is out of your control, you're going to be exhausted before you even get there. So my emotional wellness, I think, is definitely one of the bigger changes that I've noticed.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've taken some strides over the last couple of years to reel that part of my personality, back in, the need for control and the impatience and so on. I find that I'm a much happier person
Yeah.
for having gone through that.
I just want to also add, I mentioned a bit about budgeting, but your financial wellness is also something that comes up when you're traveling, as well as intellectual. So learning about a new place, a new culture, people. But going back to your financial wellness, you are able to learn how other people manage, maybe with less, or how they manage what they have, even if, let's say you guys are making the same thing, but the way they are able to balance their work life, that need to strive, depending on where you are. I think there's just a difference of that flow. So people, yes, they work, they are ambitious, but they also love to be home. They love to take breaks. They love to check on their friends and whatnot. So I think there are many different aspects that travel hits when it comes to your wellness. It's just, again, going back to that intention. What do you want to get out of it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, as I approach my 50s, one of the things that I've learned, when it comes to, I actually think it touches all areas of life, including financial, is creating priorities for yourself. If you're talking about two people who make the same amount of money and, one person is struggling and the other person isn't, I would say, and I would love to hear your feedback, the difference between those two people is the person who is on track, they have their priorities in order. What can they spend their money on that gives them the fulfillment in life that they want, but not spending money on, whether it be frivolous things or, whatever the case is. So priorities for your financial well-being, your emotional well-being, your mental well-being, your physical well-being. I think, in my opinion, it comes down to priorities.
Absolutely. And sometimes people try to fill in that gap. So again, those two people who are maybe making the same, one struggling, you're filling in a gap that could be addressed with your emotional wealth or emotional health. And so maybe there's something out of balance there, which is why people tend to overspend, or they are spending money on things that they don't really need. And they're trying to fill in some gap or some hole, taking a look at all those different aspects and trying to figure out what exactly do you want, and knowing that money or that credit card is not going to solve it. There's a whole nother chapter on, on that, but that's just one of those things that you're able to consider. And again, when you travel, you're out of your routine. And I think that's a perfect opportunity just to pull yourself aside and think about, okay, what exactly am I doing? What am I trying? Why do I spend the way I do? Why am I focused on keeping up with, my friends
Mhm.
over here? Why am I in this country? I really didn't want to go here. I just thought I saw it on Instagram. I thought it was cool. Asking yourself those questions, is really important because that's how you're able to build that foundation of confidence. You have to know who you are and what exactly you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, we could talk for hours, about these topics, so I definitely want to do them in the future, not today. Fantastic. Well, speaking of overall well-being, let's touch a little bit on the Amethyst Palaver Hut. Well, I'll just let you explain it to us.
So the Amethyst Palaver Hut was created in 2021, and the idea is to build a community where people can build confidence through travel. It started maybe like a year or so before as like a little store with encouraging words and all that. And I realized like I really wanted to get into connecting with people, especially in the realm of travel. And so it's, become what it is now. And so there are three different aspects of the Amethyst Palaver Hut. The first is the podcast that we talked about. And then there's travel coaching, which also includes wellness retreats. And the last piece is travel guides. So as I travel, or maybe as I've done research on places that I found really interesting, I'll create a guide. And I think what's helpful about that is I'm coming at it from a lens of someone who does solo travel and also focusing on wellness. And so there are others who, you could get like a nice, exciting, I don't know, a party list or itinerary. But if you want to just take care of your well-being and your wellness, then that's a bit more of my arena.
All right. Tell me a little bit more about the retreats. I think you've got something coming up in May. I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, so the Journey to Wellness is our women's retreat that's coming up in May. It's going to be May 8th through the 12th, 2025, as we are on the cusp of 2024.
Right.
But the idea behind that is just I want to pair personal development with a little bit of fun and relaxation. So giving yourself some time to escape the daily nonsense. We're going to be almost midway into the year and trying to catch up with everything and seeing where your resolutions are if you decided to make any. And the idea there is just to get back to who are you? What do you want? And how do you communicate those wants? So there's going to be a mix of coaching sessions that I'll be offering, but also we're going to have some fun activities. So there's going to be Afro dance, there's live music, yummy food. We'll even have some wine. And all of that is just to give you a moment of peace, rehabilitation, relaxation, like just get yourself back to who you need to be so that you're ready to face your day. So all of that's going to take place in Bacalar, Mexico. The registration is up now for those who are interested. And I'm excited. I think this is going to be a great opportunity. Just one, you have an opportunity to focus in on you, but then you also have some fun and adventure. So
Definitely, definitely. So this episode will be airing sometime at the end of January. So for those who are listening in January, February, so on, think about those New Year's resolutions. Think about what you have planned for yourself for 2025, and if this women's wellness retreat down in Mexico with Grace sounds awesome to you, I highly recommend that you pop over to her website and check that out. Tell us what that website is, Grace.
the website is www.amethystpalaverhut.com.
All right, fantastic. So you definitely want to check that out. It sounds really cool. I wish I could come, but I guess it's not for me.
Don't worry, there'll be more.
All right. I like it. Besides the retreat coming up 2025, where are you heading to next?
So I just got back from London, and yeah, we were there for just to check out the Christmas markets and all the wonderful
Mhm.
pretty lights. So I think right now my next plan is the trip to Mexico and just to treat myself to my own retreat before this event is going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Let's, because what we're talking about here is really taking care of ourselves, and, this podcast is dedicated, to wine, of course, food, of course, but I really want to give a third of the attention of this podcast to the travel world. And I absolutely love to travel. I find it's really the best way for us as human beings to experience something outside of ourselves, to see how other people live, to understand how other people live, and to really get into that experience as a person. And I think travel puts you so far head and shoulders over the rabble as far as being able to understand the world. And
Yeah.
I couldn't recommend getting out of that comfort zone. And whether that comfort zone is the city you grew up in, or the town you grew up in, or the region that you grew up in. I grew up in Philadelphia. I didn't really travel, as a child, except, across the river and go to the Jersey Shore. That was about as far, as we traveled. And, now that, again, I'm approaching my 50s and have been not all over the world, but to a lot of places, I feel so much better for those experiences, to be able to understand the world and the people in it more. So, and to all of your points, to understand myself better as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Grace, I really, really appreciate your time again. My guest today has been Grace Simmons. She is the amazing host of the Random and Wonderful podcast. You can go check that out on Apple and all of your other favorite podcast platforms. Head over to Amethyst Palaver Hut.com to look into Grace's retreat coming up in the month of May, and definitely check that out and tick off that box for your 2025 New Year's resolution. Grace, is there anything else you'd love to share with us before we head up?
No, I think that was it. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It was totally my pleasure, and we will talk real soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Pour and Explore. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, and your questions, so you can drop me a line at cheers@thewineguy.vin. That's cheers@thewineguy.vin. Or let's connect on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. Grab those links on my website at thewineguy.vin. Until next time, let's keep wondering and wandering. Cheers, everyone.